One of the strangest parts of healing is that things you used to tolerate start feeling unbearable. Conversations that once felt normal now feel draining. Pressure you used to carry without question now feels too heavy. Access you used to give so freely now feels costly. The way you used to live, the way you used to cope, the way you used to keep the peace, the way you used to silence yourself, it just does not fit the same anymore. And if that is where you are right now, this message is for you. Because some women think something is wrong with them when their tolerance starts changing. They think, why am I so sensitive now? Why does this bother me more than before? Why can't I just keep doing what I used to do? But beloved, hear this gently. Maybe it is not that you are becoming weaker. Maybe it is that you are becoming healthier. Maybe healing is making it harder to live in places, patterns, and pressures that once felt normal only because survival trained you to endure them. You are not becoming difficult. You are becoming clear. You are not failing. You are awakening. Healing changes your tolerance. That is one of the first things people do not always talk about. When you're disconnected from yourself, you can tolerate a lot. You can tolerate exhaustion. You can tolerate being misunderstood. You can tolerate relationships that leave you empty. You can tolerate constant pressure. You can tolerate environments that make your body tense. You can tolerate speaking gently to everyone else while speaking harshly to yourself. You can tolerate more than you should because your whole system has been trained to survive. But healing begins to interrupt that. It starts waking up the parts of you that have been quiet for too long. Your body begins to speak. Your spirit begins to resist. Your heart begins to notice. Your peace begins to matter. And suddenly, what you once called normal starts feeling heavy. Not because you are too much, but because your soul is no longer willing to call dysfunction home. That matters. Because many women shame themselves for changing tolerance. They think they should still be able to handle everything they used to handle. But the truth is, healing often makes you less available for what once kept hurting you. And that is not regression. That is wisdom. This is important. Not everything that felt normal was actually healthy. Some things only felt normal because they were familiar. Familiar pressure, familiar anxiety, familiar emotional neglect, familiar overgiving, familiar self-silencing, familiar chaos, familiar survival. And familiarity can be deceptive. It can make unhealthy things feel expected. It can make draining things feel ordinary. It can make painful patterns feel like personality. So, when healing starts changing what you can tolerate, it can feel confusing. Because what once felt normal now feels too loud, too heavy, too costly, too dishonest. And you may be tempted to wonder if you are just becoming overly emotional. But maybe the truth is simpler. Maybe you are finally feeling what your old survival self did not have room to feel. Maybe you are finally recognizing that what you once adapted to was never actually good for you. That realization can be painful because it means Some of the things you built your life around were not peace. They were coping. They were accommodation. They were endurance. They were emotional overfunctioning. They were fear dressed up as maturity. And healing has a way of making those old disguises harder to wear. When your tolerance changes, some people may not understand it. They may say, "You've changed. You're too sensitive now. You used to be okay with this. You used to be easier." And that can stir guilt because many women were taught to measure goodness by how much they could absorb without complaint, how much they could carry without asking for help, how much they could endure without changing the room. But healing changes that. It makes honesty rise. It makes your inner world matter. It makes peace feel worth protecting. And so, let me say this clearly. You are not becoming harder. You are becoming truer. Truer about what drains you. Truer about what hurts. Truer about what no longer feels right. Truer about what your soul needs in order to breathe. That is not selfish. That is alignment. And yes, when you become truer, some things around you will feel more uncomfortable. Not because healing is bad, but because truth is disruptive to patterns that depended on your quiet tolerance. That is why this part of healing can feel so lonely, because clarity can change what you can keep participating in. But lonely does not mean wrong. Sometimes lonely is simply what truth feels like before it becomes peace. This is one of the clearest signs that you are changing. Old patterns start feeling expensive. You notice how much it costs you to overextend, to overexplain, to keep the peace at your own expense, to stay in environments that keep your nervous system on edge, to say yes when your body says no, to act like you are fine when you are not. The cost becomes visible, and once you see the cost, it becomes harder to keep paying it the same way. That is not weakness, that is awakening. Because some women lived for years without realizing how much their peace was being traded for approval, access, or survival. But healing slows you down enough to see the true cost. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to realize, this conversation costs me peace. This pressure costs me softness. This pattern costs me rest. This pretending costs me myself. That kind of awareness can change your whole life. Because from that point on, healing is no longer abstract. It becomes practical. It asks, what am I no longer willing to keep paying for with my peace? That is a holy question. Some women have been praised for what was actually pain. Praised for never complaining. Praised for always adjusting. Praised for being the strong one. Praised for staying in hard things quietly. Praised for tolerating what hurt without making anyone uncomfortable. And eventually, they start to call that maturity. But healing teaches a different language. Healing says, endurance is not always maturity. Sometimes, endurance is fear. Sometimes, it is survival. Sometimes, it is habit. Sometimes, it is a nervous system that has forgotten what safety feels like. This does not mean endurance is bad. Some seasons truly require it. But endurance was never meant to be your only spiritual gift. You're also allowed to have boundaries. You are also allowed to need gentleness. You are also allowed to walk away from what keeps harming you. You're also allowed to stop calling self-betrayal strength. That is what healing begins to uncover. Not just what hurts you, but what you have been naming incorrectly. And once the naming changes, the rebuilding changes as well. So, what do you do when your tolerance starts changing? You listen. You do not rush to shame yourself. You do not immediately force yourself back into old patterns just because they used to be familiar. You listen. You ask, what is my healing teaching me here? What feels different now? What is costing me too much? What have I outgrown internally? Even if my outer life has not fully caught up yet. That is where gentle rebuilding begins. Not in panic, not in performance, but in listening. Listening to your body, listening to your spirit, listening to your fatigue, listening to your discomfort, listening to the quiet truth that says, this no longer fits. That truth deserves respect. Because healing is not only about becoming more peaceful, it is also about becoming more honest about what peace requires. And sometimes, peace requires change. Not dramatic change overnight, but honest change. A different boundary, a different pace, a different expectation, a different level of self-respect, a different willingness to stop tolerating what keeps taking too much. That is not rebellion, that is repair. Before we close, let your heart sit with this for a moment. What feels heavier now than it used to? What no longer fits, even if you used to call it normal? What are you trying to force yourself to keep tolerating just because you once survived it? And what if that discomfort is not failure? What if it is healing? What if that is simply proof that your soul is no longer willing to live the same way? Let that sit. Because maybe the next step is not becoming tougher again. Maybe it is becoming honest enough to honor what your healing is teaching you. And this is where the next part of healing begins. Because once your tolerance changes, another truth starts to rise. You are allowed to need more than survival, more than coping, more than enduring, more than getting through the day. And that is the next part of this journey. If this message is speaking to your heart today, say this quietly with me. I am not becoming difficult. I am becoming honest. I am not weaker because my tolerance is changing. I am healing. I am allowed to notice what cost me peace. I am allowed to outgrow what once felt normal. I am allowed to stop calling survival my standard. I am rebuilding with truth. I am listening to what my healing is teaching me. I am becoming whole. If this message found you today, let this be your reminder. Things may feel harder to tolerate now, not because you are failing, but because you are healing. What once felt normal may have only felt familiar. What once felt manageable may have always been costly. And now, your healing is making that cost visible. Honor that. You do not need to shame yourself for changing. You do not need to force yourself back into old tolerance just to prove you are still easy. You are allowed to grow into someone who no longer calls constant heaviness normal. That is gentle rebuilding. Not becoming cold, not becoming unreachable, not becoming hard, becoming true. If this message spoke to your heart, write this in the comments. My healing is changing what I can tolerate. And when this video ends, watch next. You are allowed to need more than survival. Because once you begin to see that old patterns no longer fit, the next part of healing is learning that you are allowed to want more than endurance. Subscribe to Dream Life Diaries and continue this gentle rebuilding journey with us. You do not have to keep calling what hurts you normal. Healing changes your tolerance, not because you are becoming harder, but because you are becoming true.